Actually, I told him, I said, I want to go to Paul. All right, I tell you, why don't we begin? So, let's see. Just a couple problems. One is nobody wants to sit with Ed, and I mean, you back there, nobody wants to sit at your table either? Okay. Thank God. Well, I tell you what, why don't we just start in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Almighty God, we ask you to send your Holy Spirit upon us. Fill us with the power of your love and guide us with your wisdom. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So thank you for who made the treats. I know Connie made the lemon cake because that's her signature dish. Who made the little zucchini chocolate things? Okay, I'll take credit. Was it Gina? Was it you? Most of my food in my refrigerator has been there for a couple months. So we're doing church architecture just kind of for fun. So on this class, I just want to begin with the very, very ancient church. So this sounds kind of strange. In the earliest Christianity, we don't have really any architectural designs, and that's because for the first 300 years, we're a persecuted church. And so in the very early church, you would actually have met in people's homes, usually somebody who's wealthy, and the basic architectural plan would be homes were created with a water source in the center, and that was like air conditioning. And then on one side, like where this is, would be some doors that would be for the dining room. So early church, you would baptize in the font in the courtyard, and then the dining room is where the whole church would gather for the Eucharist. Does that make sense? So oddly enough, it was in people's homes. But the church is not a building, it's a people. So I love that. And when there weren't persecutions and the church had some money, they might actually buy a whole house which we transform for public worship. And they would call those, the church was a people, and where you met to pray was called, quote unquote, eating houses, because the Eucharist was celebrated there. Obviously, not a lot of examples for the first 300 years, because when a persecution did break out, and you did have a church, you knew exactly where to go. But like on people's homes, I think it's kind of interesting. Archaeologically, they unearthed Peter's house, St. Peter's house, that was turned into a church. Now, this sounds kind of strange too. The Armenian king was the first to stop the persecutions. So not Constantine, but actually this Armenian king. So from the 3rd century on, the most ancient architects we have of early churches was actually Armenia. And this sounds kind of strange. For the first 300 years of our religion, we did not want our churches to look like pagan temples. So like the Parthenon, we didn't want it to look like pagan temples, because even though in the pagan temples sacrifice happened inside, people would actually gather outside. So at the Parthenon, it's not like people would gather inside. Outside is where the people were. So in the 4th century, when Constantine came on board and basically kind of ended the persecutions, that's when we have architecture. And so you have to think, it took over 300 years before we really have church architecture because of the I hate computers. Church architecture. But in the 4th century, we started to build churches, but they're after the Roman style. So this is the Basilica in Pompeii, and basilicas were not places of worship, but they're really courthouses. And basilica is Greek for regal or kingly. And so it would be after a basilica style. So early churches were long and rectangular with a curved apse, a curved wall at one end. So here's kind of an aerial view. You have kind of this main aisle, and then there'd be a curved wall here. And it was a courthouse. And the judge would sit on the curved wall side because the sound would be better on that side. So if you go to like Holy Apostles, my previous parish, we have an apsed curved wall. I love that. Also because, this sounds strange, if you remember from Neolithic times, like that Malta huge temple that was found underground, they had a curved wall. In the ancient caves or Newgrange, in these Neolithic sites, they had a curved wall. So when you entered a basilica, your eye immediately went down to where the curved apse would be. So you're, what the heck is that? I have no idea what that was. I don't know. So here's the remains of Pompeii, but this is this is apse. So this is a basilica style. And the basilicas were always orientated east to west. So when you attended Mass, the sunlight would come through the windows and hit the altar. So you would experience Christ both in the form of the Eucharist and light hitting the altar. And I like that because early pyx, pyx are what carried the host. In the ancient church, when you had a pyx, this round gold thing that would hold the Eucharist when you delivered communion, they would write in Greek, because it works in Greek, light and life. And so the basilica, architecturally, you could see where the presider and the altar would be right here. I love that. And the tabernacle would be behind it, so it all kind of lines up. I like that. In modern evangelical churches, think about this. The sanctuary is a stage that really just highlights the presider and the band. And so I think that's kind of strange. But I love the rectangular apse. And at first it was civic, but so that's a curved wall apse. This is Santa Sabina in Rome. Once again, I know I'm kind of weird. I love an apse, not the snake, the curved wall. So when I say basilica style, is that kind of clear what it means? Let's see. One of these is St. Paul outside the wall. That's not a good picture. But anyhow, so I love an apse, but like this one is in, I think this one's in Croatia, and this one would have been what churches looked like in the 500s. It's one of this ancient church from the 500s, but notice they have a courtyard. I do like that in a church where you would have a courtyard outside, so the community could gather in the courtyard, and then when you walked into church, there could be more silence and focused attention. So I personally think every church should have some sort of vestibule or courtyard where after Mass the community can gather and discuss, but some sort of sound barrier in between. We don't have that here. But once again, I like the basilica style with a curved wall because it creates direction, directionality, vertical, and yet communal. So I love a basilica style. So when I say basilica style, these are all basilica styles, but they also, what they would do is put mosaics and jewels in the wall. Now remember last time I spoke about the temple having jeweled walls of the Garden of Eden? Well, early Christians did the same thing. So the Romans would decorate basilica floors with mosaics of animals and stories, but early Christians were uncomfortable about putting mosaics in the floor because, you're not really don't want to walk on the image of Christ or the saints. So they put it on the walls. And so the walls, the building would be your teacher telling a story. So there'd be the mosaics on the side, and they would put Old Testament saints, Christian saints, angels. Sorry, I jumped ahead to I thought I had more mosaics. But I love the fact that the walls would teach you. Now, Roman history of arches were always tied to victories. So I do like in the basilica style, there's always these arches, usually an arch over the altar, symbolizing victory. Now, a basilica is just a square, but then, maybe I have it back here. No, don't. What they then developed is basilica with transepts. So I'm gonna move into the Romanesque style. This is my favorite. By the end of the whole series here, I want you to be of my opinion that this is the best style. So this is a Romanesque, and notice how they turn the rectangle into a cross. So from above, I just think it's beautiful. From above, the church is literally in the shape of a cross. Love that style. They'd have some double colonnades so you could walk all around the church in this pilgrimage. And you'd have side aisles, so there's that kind of a systemized plan to it. Some basilicas were in the round. I won't deny that. Some were in the round. It does work, but I like the Romanesque style, where you enter through the feet of Christ, and the head is where the tabernacle would be, and the heart is where the altar would be. I just think that's perfect. You do have the round styles, but not a big fan of round. Why am I in the Vikings? Oh. Okay, so that's the 5th century Romanesque, we're still in the Romanesque style, but basilica. Now, what happened is that in the 6th and 7th and 8th century, we really have very few remains of churches because of these people. The collapse of the Roman Empire with all these hordes, and then the Roman Empire collapsed. There's this constant war, lack of education. So architecture kind of remains dead in this time period. And churches would have been these wooden structures. Now, a parish church would rarely be a basilica style, especially during the Dark Ages, because everybody was poor. So they would have been wood structures, dirt floors. But with the rise of Charlemagne, and he basically conquers Europe, there's this momentary peace. Unfortunately, after his death, there was all this infighting. And so great architecture just becomes a stall. In the 19th century, these horrible people called the Vikings and the Hungarians, they also kind of stopped any great development because of the constant attacks. And so monasteries and churches were forced to, another example of Vikings who are ruining the world. So monasteries were forced to erect these defensive walls. So anyhow, if you do know any Vikings, thank them for keeping us in the Dark Ages. But with Otto II, Otto I was resurrected as a Roman Empire, and there's this period of peace, and he married this Byzantine princess, and so this large building structure started. And so this should be St. Michael's. And so these are called his name was Otto, the king, so Ottoan churches. So the Romanesque style comes back into style. Now, honest to God, do you not find that stunningly beautiful, or is it just me? It's just me, really? And really, this is from the 600s? It's amazing. I just think it's absolutely beautiful. And so, really, just these Romanesque buildings, I find stunningly beautiful. Now, Romanesque does not mean they date back to the Roman Empire. Romanesque means Roman-like. And so when civilization, after the Dark Ages, start to rebuild, they look back to the last great age, which the last great age was the Roman Empire. So Romanesque is not classical Roman structure. It's actually, it's a collection of styles that look back to Rome. And so the common Romanesque features are a basilica form, typically in a shape of a cross. Once again, that's Romanesque. But also notice, when I say Romanesque, the second characteristic is heavy stone, thick columns and thick walls. And they needed thick columns and thick walls because just to support the roof. So, and also notice Romanesque does tend to be dark inside because they have little tiny windows, and the little tiny windows are always round. So I'll give you a hint. If it's a rounded window, it's Romanesque. If it's pointed, and we're going to get to that next class, it's Gothic. Pointed, it sounds strange. A pointed arch was a great invention. But you have to have these thick walls, so you need more candlelight and little tiny windows. Now, I still find it beautiful. Notice the thick columns. You're not going to find that in Gothic. Gothic has thin, tiny little columns. But see, I kind of like it dark, so you have more candlelight. And there's this kind of whole theology of darkness. So Romanesque is associated with kind of dark churches, but I love the thick, heavy stones. These are all Romanesque. So to me, darkness is kind of nice, because if you're a poet, you have to kind of go into some darkness to really think about things. So the Romanesque has to be appreciated, but also has kind of this sense of silence and echo, but also darkness. So because of the darkness, there's a greater interplay between shafts of light and darkness. But once again, Romanesque, you can see little tiny windows that just light up in the darkness. But once again, rounded windows, heavy, thick columns. I just like it because it speaks of, I don't know, something stable. Okay, arches, as I said, rounded arches that they made beautiful. This one's in England. St. Niccolo, I love this church. It's Romanesque again. I'll tell you a story about this church. If you're wondering why Santa Claus is here, because Santa Claus is here. And this is a church in Italy, the Calabrese, what's Calabrese? Calabrian, part of Italy. At this time period, the Islam is invading Constantinople and Turkey, and when they take over, they destroy churches, desecrate the graves of the saints, and so I love this. The Italians, Calabrians, they know St. Nicholas is going to be destroyed, so they go over to Turkey, grab his body, and take it back to Italy and build this basilica church for Santa Claus. So, do you not find that kind of funny? They stole Santa Claus's body. The Italians stole his body. And thank God they did. But, so this is St. Nicholas's church. And they built this beautiful church. Now, often the stone will have relief. So there's beautiful stonework, often towers, curved windows, curved arches. Doors are going to be thick as well. Here's another example. You can easily tell this is Romanesque. Curved walls, big, thick, heavy. Love this one too. Curved walls, big, thick. Does that make sense? You can just tell. Usually they're in a cross shape. Another one, absolutely beautiful. I know they're tiny windows, but they create these shafts of light that I just love. So if we're on a tour and you said, what kind of style of church is that? Romanesque. Little tiny windows, big, thick stone. I do like, so Romanesque, I don't know why, I just love the heavy stone. I think it's where heaven and earth meet. This is, should be said, this is the Durham Cathedral. Let's see, I went past this. Some of these were French style. But, so you have French style Romanesque and Romanesque. This is St. Cuthbert. The walls would have been painted red and, when you look at it, they would have been painted red and green just to mimic the Celtic manuscripts. Notice, I love those huge columns, all of them painted differently. So St. Cuthbert was built after the Norman invasion. So notice the columns are all different. So I just find that incredibly beautiful. Those are longeons, chevron, fluted, different styles of columns. But once again, big and thick and heavy. So this, I think, is kind of interesting. This was a mosque in Cordoba, and they mimicked it in the wall. So the same way this was a mosque, they made this in St. Cuthbert, and they made it match the Celtic manuscripts. You'll see that. It's picking up the walls in St. Cuthbert. Let's see. So this is a French style of Romanesque. So, and you get a lot of relief work now. So not only thick walls, but then they started to make this relief work. So these are not columns. These are just relief works. Stone that's carved. So like Notre Dame has that as well. It was very popular, started among the French. It's got, well, Notre Dame is Gothic, but notice there's Christ in the center, because when you're walking through the doors, you're walking through Christ. So, and then you have angels to the right, saints to the other side. Peter is welcoming you into heaven. Love that. So the damned in some of these relief are here. They're going to hell. They're chained up. And then you also have the saints going into heaven. That one was modeled after me. So Benedictine monasteries were popular to having Last Judgments also scenes. But I just think it's stunningly beautiful. St. John on one side, St. Peter on another, all these relief works. The reason why the Benedictine had a lot of Last Judgment scenes is because St. Benedict said you should always keep the judgment of God before your eyes. So, Last Judgment scene, but a lot of beautiful relief work. Last Judgment scene, the tetramorphs. But once again, it's a column, but it's more than a column. It's all the saints. Like, it's so stylized. I love how you see what you're entering. So, just absolutely beautiful. Anyhow, sorry, I went a little too far. But like, we're going to get new church doors, got to tell you that. And not really quite 100% sure what they're going to look like. But church doors should not just be functional doors. They should tell you, I'm entering Christ. So, like, I like church doors that have either an image of Christ on it or a cross, because that's what you're entering. I love a church that's designed like a cross, because that's what you're entering. The architecture should tell you some theology. It shouldn't just be a building for the sake of building. The building should describe. So in church, there's all these mosaics, and the mosaics are a way of teaching people, and you put jewels in them. So that's going to be next. I think I went a little too quick over that, but that's Romanesque. Now, this is, okay, so I'm just going to stop here. Does that, I know it's a quick class on Romanesque architecture, but does that describe what I mean by Romanesque architecture? Gothic is going to be the opposite of this. And I also like Gothic. It's my second favorite. But Gothic is going to be light and thin columns. This is going to be thick. But I like something that is thick because it kind of just, I don't know, I like a heaviness to the church. Does that make any sense? I like, that's just me. So this, I got to tell you what this is. Anybody know what this is? Oh, good job. It is a mosque, but What's that? Um, so this sounds kind of strange. Romanesque would have been popular in the West. But also remember, there were equally as many Christians, or more so, in the East. Eastern churches, they preferred more the basilica such style that was in more round. It was really square with a round dome. So this actually is Hagia Sophia. It was built quite early. And then why it looks like a mosque is because later, in the Middle Ages, when the Islam invaded Constantinople and changed it to Istanbul, they overtook Hagia Sophia and turned it into a mosque. Does that make sense? So technically, it was at first a Catholic church. Now, if have anybody been to Hagia Sophia besides me? It is really, for its time period, it would have been the stunning architect of the world. If you go to Turkey, if you've ever been to Istanbul, you have to go there. So I have to increase this. It was the most beautiful building at some time. Now, obviously, the Muslims put that up, but this was a very ancient Catholic church. I didn't want to do that. But now, oddly enough, now it's just a museum, so you can go there, but Turkey is thinking about turning it back into a mosque, which I find upsetting because it really was a Catholic church first. So, just have to say, if I was to build a church, I would want it kind of with the heavy stone and a crucifix, shape of a cross. Does that make sense? So, I also love columns, but I love columns like, we're in this debate, and I'll tell you what the debate is, and I'll tell you what the right answer is. So we only have 2 columns, really, in our church. And did you ever notice that those 2 red brick walls by the entrance? Like, it kind of drives me up a wall because why do you have 2 red? I know the outside of the church is, but inside we have white, and now you have those 2 brick walls that serve no purpose. But think about this. In the Romanesque, a column, you just didn't make a column. You made a column that was with relief and saints, and so it gave an education. I think just having a brick wall for a brick wall's sake makes no sense whatsoever. So, like I'm going to put, did you notice the holy water fonts? Well, so, like I told you this class is going to be a lot of my opinions. We had these little tiny dishes around the corner, so you couldn't even notice them. And then they were against the red brick, and then you'd have to know or bump into them to see them. So I want to put icons of Christ on that red brick. But I don't like the red brick. It doesn't say anything. So I want to paint the brick white, but the problem is when you paint brick white, it rarely turns out white. You know what I mean? Yeah, it kind of... so we could do that, but the debate is, well, they won't turn out white. They'll turn out... My staff. Yeah, they're wrong. They're wrong about a lot of things, but I let it go. But I'm not an interior decorator, but I just think a church architecture, my whole point, church architecture should speak about the spiritual. And fortunately, like St. Pius was built just to be functional, to house people, not to give a theological idea. Think how brilliant it is to have a curved apse, how brilliant it is to make the church into the shape of a cross, where the heart, and usually like in a Romanesque style, there's a dome, but the dome is over the altar. And the altar is where the heart of Christ would be. The head is where the tabernacle will be. I just love a Romanesque church. Okay, opinions. It's a pretty easy class. To be honest, we are trying to get air conditioning, but you know what the problem is? No, I mean, there's a lot of things broken. No, but the quickest we're going to get air conditioning in is next year. So, yeah, but that's not really, but we have to buy it. And so, it's not the money. I mean, I'd spend the money. It'll take time to get it installed, and by that time, it'll be October. So, yes. Oh, so there's only one cathedral per diocese, and the cathedral is where the bishop is. So who is the pastor of the cathedral? The bishop. Now, he'll put somebody else in charge because he's not going to be there 100% of the time. And that person is called a rector. But there's only one cathedral per diocese. So, and a basilica is, it has to be actually named a basilica, but a basilica is a big church. So, basilical style is that rectangular. You can have it round. But like ours is not a basilica. It's not that big. Does that make sense? So you can have several basilicas, but you can only have one cathedral. A parish, yeah. Hold on one sec. He raised his hand, so he goes. Oh, okay. By sanctuary, you don't mean the sanctuary. You mean like a place of safety. Okay, that's a great question, but I'm going to have to give you a long, boring answer. But I won't. Cities are a big theme in the Bible. Cities are a concentration of human beings. And cities can either be for good or evil. It sounds kind of strange. So, like, Jerusalem was going to be this city of compact unity where goodness was going to be on the earth. Heaven is called the New Jerusalem. Heaven in the book of Revelation is considered a city. And in ancient times, for fortification, you would need to build a wall around your city. And a wall symbolizes protection and guarding life. Well, so think about this. During the Romanesque styles, with all these Vikings, and you would build up a wall to protect the church and the monastery. So a wall symbolizes protection of life. So this takes me a while to. So in the Old Testament, God does allow them to build cities, but then I think it's 12 or 7 sanctuary cities where if your life is in danger, the innocent can run for protection. So the idea is that, in the Old Testament, a city was a sanctuary for those who needed their life protected, and the church should be a sanctuary. Now, granted, that happened because of those Vikings, but I do love the idea that the whole church should be a sanctuary of safety that guards life. So for me, getting back, I love Gothic, but I love Romanesque more because I love a big, thick wall. So think about the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, there is this huge mega wall around the heaven is this sanctuary, the city, but it's also a temple. Heaven is a church, and it has this wall that's miles high and miles thick with jewels in it. And so you think, what does that symbolize? The protection of life. No injustice could pass through it. So I like a church with big, thick walls because this idea of, here life is protected. The church is a sanctuary. It's picking up that Old Testament theme of No, our human community should be a place that protects and guards life. So heaven has a wall around it, but it also has gates. And the gates are kept always open. So the church is always welcoming, but the church is always supposed to protect life. Does that make sense? And architecturally, it's playing that out in the Bible with these big, thick walls. Why I like Romanesque architecture is it seems safe, a big, thick wall. You know what I mean? So, Ed.
One of the things that I was impressed with in the older churches around Italy, in Italy that we visited maybe 20 of them in the time that we were there, that most of the pulpits were in the middle because they didn't have sound systems. And so the priest would have to come from the altar all the way out to the middle of the church to preach. And then also, I noticed that the pews around that part of the church were worn. The rest of the church, the pews were not worn.
Yeah, they did these whole things with, that's going to be more with the Gothic, to be honest. Because Romanesque with thick walls, this is before sound systems. The sound bounces off the walls, right? And even on like Apple computers, you can create sounds that have cathedral sounds to it. And what they really mean is Romanesque, where it has that echoey, stony feel to it. So that was one way to increase the sound. So you would have a pulpit that was raised up and usually some sort of back so that, if you ever notice that, I'll get into that next time, but back so that the sound would project out. So now we have wonky microphone systems. So. No, it doesn't have to be. They don't have to be east to west. Holy Apostles was, which I have to really say I like. I just like a morning sun on Sunday, the light flooding in from the back. But they made a terrible mistake at Holy Apostles, and that is they didn't put in a big window in back, so the light comes from the ground, but it should have been a window in back so that it was like this high beam focus right on the altar. Think about New Grange. Do you remember the story of New Grange? Where, no, you guys don't. It was really only 2 weeks ago. Neolithic, older than the pyramids. But on the winter solstice, the light would come from the back and just hit the altar where they celebrated funerals. So, I love that New Grange where they made sure the light hit the altar. So in Romanesque, you usually have a big window in back so that it works as a spotlight to the altar. I think the altar and the tabernacle is the center point. So, I love how Romanesque architecture designed it that way, that your eye goes there, the light goes there. So, you don't want, Romanesque art rarely have big windows behind the altar because then it obscures the tabernacle and altar. The big window would be in back. Okay, like a basilica style, that was originally a courthouse style. So basilicas would have been civic courthouses. Does that make sense? So at first we did not want our churches to look anything like a pagan temple. But then 400 years later, basilicas are beautiful and they work out perfectly for a church. So they chose, I should say, basilicas for that reason. But also because where the curved wall would be where the judge would sit, and our judge is Christ. So it kind of worked. So. No. Very good. So, very good. I should have brought that out. think about it. You only have tiny windows, tiny, tiny windows. So the Romanesque style is going to emphasize mosaics because you have big stone walls. But one thing you can't have is big windows because otherwise the whole thing would collapse. Now, next week, architecture takes this change where this abbot invents a whole new style of building that allows huge stained glass windows. That's Gothic. So, yeah, stained glass windows wouldn't have been a big thing here. So, Stations of the Cross happened with St. Francis. So, Stations of the Cross, we know this from ancient documents, that early Christians would go to Jerusalem during Lent and retrace the steps of Christ. We have this famous journal from this woman named Egerius, who writes about her journey to Jerusalem. So you'd try and retrace the steps of Jerusalem, but then Jerusalem gets destroyed. Then it gets rebuilt, and then the Muslims take over. And so when you get to St. Francis, the 13th century, St. Francis says, well, the poor, they can't ever make it to Jerusalem, so we'll bring Jerusalem here. And St. Francis just draws the Stations of the Cross and put them up. And then they become popular. But think about this. This sounds kind of strange. If you go to a church in the East, by East I mean the Greek side, they had St. Francis was in the West, Europe. So it's more of a Western thing than, and it's from the 13th century. So the majority of Christians would have no idea what you're talking about when you said Stations of the Cross. The 13th century, that's closer to our time. Does that make sense? So I like Stations of the Cross, but they're an addition. So you wouldn't find any Stations of the Cross in a Romanesque church. Well, you would now, but not at that time period. So, yeah. Yeah. At the second coming. But, I think they're so beautiful. The thing about, any church demands upkeep. And so, I'd say, I don't think St. Pius was well cared for. Because when I first got here, there was a broken truss in the roof. Think about what that means. And I'm reading the report, and it said it should hold unless there's a heavy snow. I don't know what that means. And I hate to say this, I hate engineers. Just tell me yes or no. So had to have that fixed. But to be honest, now this sounds kind of strange. Churches demand maintenance. And if you don't keep up the maintenance, it costs a lot more. So, this is my complaint about St. Pius, is that really nothing has been done since the 1970s. Who mentioned pews? Okay, the pews are terrible. I don't really kneel, but I've heard, on kneelers, because I'm not in the pews. The kneelers are terrible. I hear it every single weekend. So, seriously, if you know somebody who upholsters and does repair on that, I don't know, since 1970, couldn't we have had those repaired? So we're going to have all those restuffed and upholstered. But you should have done it a long time before this. And trying to, that's going to be a major project because think how long it'd take to reupholster and repad each pew and kneeler. It's going to take months, Oh, you do it? Great. We got a woman who can upholster. Thank you. Yes, because I think the 70s are through. the pews, have you ever noticed, are in two different colors? But like, so yeah, they're always scaffolding, but you should have taken care of it. And everybody, like, it is kind of funny. People don't realize the cost of a building. It's kind of naive because they'll say, "Oh, you have," like always got this at Holy Apostles. I stopped publishing the finances, and the reason why is that because I'm grumpy, and I was a bookkeeper for my fraternity, and true story, I can't remember how much there was, but so we had some in savings, and at one of our meetings, they said, "Well, how much is in savings?" And so I said, and they said, "Oh, great, let's have a kegger." And I was like, "No, we got bills. Bills keep coming in, and the furnace breaks." And so they all voted, and we had a kegger. And I thought, "Oh, that will be the last time." And they're kind of idiots. So I took 100,000, most of what was in savings, and put it in a money market, and they never even noticed. So when they'd say the next year, how about a kegger? Oh, we only have a couple hundred. But they never asked, like, I mean, I didn't steal the money, but so what I noticed, same thing in parish life. Once people realize, oh, there's $100,000, let's just do that. Well, like at Holy Apostles, if one air conditioning unit went out, that's $10,000. So it looks like a lot of money unless something breaks. And buildings demand constant upkeep. If you don't, it's a lot more expensive later. So same with these. I hope Romanesque churches stay till the day. I mean, think about that. Like, we have Santa Claus's body. No, isn't that just amazing? You want to go see Santa Claus? Head off to Italy. But we have all these churches, Romanesque styles, are really quite ancient. Why wouldn't we want to maintain them? They're stunningly beautiful. So, oh yeah, that woman back there had her. Oh, out of the sanctuary. I was going to cover that what I was thinking about doing our last class was it only take like 20 minutes. Go through and explain the symbolisms of why things are they are in a church. But think about this. Go back to the last class. What are the 3 things God told Moses you have to have? Yeah, altar, cabinet. So why, and the sanctuary symbolizes, like where the pews are, that's the nave. The sanctuary symbolizes heaven. So you bow before going in and out of the sanctuary. That's our journey to heaven. Heaven has those 3 things. Why, for the love of God, would you move it down the street? I just find that disobeying the Bible. So I don't know why they moved tabernacles out. Oh, I know why. Okay, it's a misreading. So the Vatican II documents say that the tabernacle is an altar of transcendence, and the altar that we celebrate the Eucharist is an altar of eminence. So the tabernacle can't be in competition with the altar, so it has to be in its own, I forget the wording, but basically kind of prayer space. So in the 70s, people interpreted that, oh, we want to get rid of tabernacles. That's not what it said. Like look at the Romanesque architecture where you have the curved wall, where you have the tabernacle and then the altar. They're not in competition, but they're lined up with each other. Does that make sense? They're in 2 separate spaces. So it's a misreading of the Vatican II documents. So, oh, somebody over here had their hand up. Yeah. This church? Jesus? Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't want to throw any, but I question, like, the flooring is terrible in our church. And the odd part? The one part of the church that's stable is a part of our church that was built first. You'd think that would be the part that's falling apart, but it's the part that was built in the 70s that is our biggest problem. I don't think 70s were good for building. But the 50s part of the church is rock solid. Explain that one. So, yeah. He grew up at St. Joseph, Issaquah. Oh, he said his church looked like a Quonset hut. What was the time period? Yeah, 70s were terrible for architecture. It, like I love the Romanesque, and I could go more like all this Romanesque going back. Like it's so beautiful. I pick one, I guess, but like there's just something ethereal and beautiful, and you want to pray. There's this YouTube channel of this guy visiting different churches, like denominations, and most 90% of all Protestant churches are just functionary. They're just buildings, and make sure you have a big screen TV. He says, but then he says, why is it when you walk into a Catholic church, you suddenly lower your voice? Like you just know you're in something sacred just because of the architecture, rather than really a big screen beer hall concert. And I think the 70s, and I'm going to explain that, not next time, but the time when we get to, there is a psychological reason why that is not an accident either, but that's two classes into it. That there is a reason, I just don't want to tell you right now because it's coming up. Yeah. Mission style. Yeah, so what's that? So that's mission style. But what you have is offshoots. So when the mission style come, for the heat, you'd need big, thick walls. It keeps the place cool. And think about those missions. They were also fortresses. They had to be a sanctuary as well. And so, like, they're kind of like, think about this. The mission style is Romanesque, but in a southwestern style. So it's still a kind of this cousin of Romanesque. Thick walls. Usually they have small windows, too, because they had to be defensive. Yeah. And usually that's because of a roof issue. Like, you can't make them too wide without problems. Right. I love the church in Sandpoint. And I love it because the same way you have a southwestern style, why couldn't we have a northwestern style? You know, the thing I do like about our church, I didn't like it at first, is that big wooden wall with the rock. But if you think about this, what's the terrain of Coeur d'Alene like? Rocky and wood. So, like, I like a Romanesque style, but I also like the Sandpoint Church because it has a northwest feel to it, but it's also kind of Romanesque in a way. High ceilings, because remember, a church should have this vertical feel, but also direction, that you're moved towards the altar. They have pillars. I love that. Yeah, I like a cruciform. The other thing I like about Sandpoint is that their columbarium is the walls of the church. Isn't that amazing? So you could say, oh, there's Pat Toomey. I just love that. I think that's such a clever design, is to put our people the same way. Remember, Neolithically, they put the dead in the floor of their chapels. This is Neolithic human beings. You know, this is going back, way to BC. I just think we want the dead with us. And our columbarium is nice, but if I had to redo a church, I love the St. Joe's way of, we'll put them in and outside the church. Mm-hmm. You need a separation space. Think about this. One of the most ancient churches, the one I showed you in Croatia, where early churches had courtyards so that people, socialize and pray. But I don't know, that's me. Okay, yeah. I have no idea. I don't know anything about that. So, churches do cost. Buildings cost. But why is the Church of England churches upkeep? But also, that's probably political, because remember, Henry VIII made himself Pope, and so it's kind of a weird thing. I don't really know it, but so he made himself Pope. So the Pope of the Episcopalian Church is King Charles. But the Bishop of Canterbury runs things. But the Bishop of Canterbury is chosen by the Prime Minister because they wanted to equalize power. And the Prime Minister is like Methodist. So now the Methodist picks out the head of... So that's a political web I don't really understand. Okay, so next time is Gothic. Gothic, I love Gothic, but it's kind of the opposite of Romanesque. Does this make sense what I mean by Romanesque? Okay, I did want to show you one. Oh, dang it. Okay, I hate this. Can I show you one more thing if I can get this started? So, how come this thing's not? I swear to God, I think technology hates me. Did it die? Okay, so I'll just explain it, see if I can get it to work. I'm kind of weird. I think symbols are important. So, because I am an obnoxious person, the problem is I want to have I want to change our logo to St. Pius, but I also want to change the logos, and this is a little controversial, to Holy Family Catholic School. And the reason why is that a lot of people don't know that Holy Family Catholic School is our parish school. Does that make sense? I hate technology. No, it helps. No. Okay, so I'll just tell you. So I'm changing the logo at Holy Family Catholic School as well. Now, granted, they voted not to change it because they said the original founders of the church would get upset. No, they won't. They won't get upset. They just picked a logo of the Holy Family. But my thought was to make it more obvious that the Holy Family Catholic School is a parish school, I wanted to change the logo. So I keep Mary, Jesus, and Joseph. But then have on the logo Saints Thomas, George, Pius. And so then I wanted to have each parish to have a color. I'm just forcing this. So St. Pius color will be blue. And I forget exactly, St. Thomas can be gold, and St. George can be red. And so Mary, Jesus, and Joseph is in red, gold, and this computer is not getting the hint. It's a liar. I'm signaling it to it. I'll just tell you. So I'm going to change the logo so that it has Mary, Jesus, and Joseph, but like Pius will be in blue, George will be in red. Does that make sense? The other thing is, and I'll be selling shirts for this, I'm kind of forcing the school next year to every year have I'm just telling you, but now I can't show it off. Every year to have a theme. So this year is the year of grit. So I made shirts that said Holy Family Catholic School, and then big letters, the year of grit. And then in the back it says grit, and it gives a definition, perseverance, tenacity, and then at the bottom it says, see Holy Family Catholic School. And the reason why is that, talk to teachers. Children are behind because of COVID, but also their self-discipline is behind. So this coming year is going to be the year of grit. Next year we'll make it the year of something else, whatever virtue we need. Because unlike a public school, we can say we will teach grit. So I came up with a symbol for it. This class is on church architecture and beauty. Why not use symbols to unify and every Mass they have to pray for grit. So if you're wondering why does he mention this, because you'll see the new logo, and you'll also see we're going to sell T-shirts that have the year of grit, and every Mass I'll pray for greater grit. And then when I did this before, you can say to the kids, no complaining. The rest of the world can fall behind, but be gritty. Oh, I haven't told him yet. No, I haven't told him, but well, barely, 2 years. But my position is, I know I'm kind of rude, but St. Ignatius said you should go through life with 1 foot raised. Just be going for it. I don't know where I'm going. I just know I'm not standing still. And I think the Catholics have to be more united in this valley. So why not have logos? Why not have logos that all work together, that we're one church? They don't know yet. I haven't told them. The same way I shoved it down the school's throat, I am shoving it down their throat. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just how you're with your husband. I'll let you know. All right? I'll let you know when I want your opinion. So, all right. So there you go. See you next week then. So God bless you.